All righty, welcome everyone. So, this Sunday we are actually celebrating Pentecost, 50 days after Easter. But when Pentecost falls on Memorial Day weekend, we actually celebrate it the following Sunday because we always confirm our confirmation class on Pentecost Sunday. And since people tend to go here, there, and everywhere for Memorial Day, we then celebrate Pentecost on the following Sunday, which this year will be June 3rd. And fortunately, we are part of what is known as the Free Church tradition, which means we can do what we want liturgically. If this were a Catholic church, there would be no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You would celebrate Pentecost this Sunday, and I'm not sure if they do confirmation on Pentecost as well or not. But anyways.
But they did confirmation a month ago.
Oh, yeah. So they don't do it on Pentecost.
No.
Yep. And since the bishop has to be present for confirmation in the Catholic Church, and the bishop, to my knowledge, cannot be in multiple places at the same time, my guess is that they have confirmation for different communities of faith on different Sundays. So
Actually, they combine them in one church.
They are doing that. They are doing that now. They are combining numbers of churches, confirmation classes. And so the scripture reading for Pentecost from the Hebrew scriptures this year is from the book of Numbers. Gold star to anyone who can tell me why the third book of the Hebrew scriptures is known as the book of Numbers. It refers to the fact that the book of Numbers begins with a census of all the people who came out of Egypt in the Exodus. And so that's why it's called the book of Numbers. So without further ado, let us have a word of prayer. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for calling us together once again. We pray that we may be still and know that your Spirit is with us and upon us and is even now waiting to lead us deeper into the truth of your wisdom and love. And for that, we give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty. So, as I say, this is a reading from the book of Numbers. The Israelites have been in the wilderness for a period of time. Anyone remember how long they were in the wilderness? 40 years. That's right. And 40 is a biblical number in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, which is meant to say a long time. And so, for example, when Noah was in the ark and they had the flood, it rained and poured for 40 days and 40 nights. When Elijah went into the wilderness to escape the evil queen Jezebel, how many days was he in there? 40 days. And Jesus went into the wilderness, was tempted 3 times, and he was there for how many days? Of course, 40. It means a long time. And essentially, the Jewish calendar, which is still in existence today, is a lunar calendar. It's based on the lunar cycle. And so the lunar cycle is, 28 days, I believe. So 40 days meant more than a month. And so it was meant to signify a significant amount of time. And the Israelites were in the wilderness for 40 years. And welcome to those who are joining us online. I am going to actually start oh, silly me. Hold on. I closed out the audio.
Among them, onion, cucumbers,
Okay.
and boiled it in pots, and milk up in the night. The manna fell with it.
Okay.
Moses heard
I'm
the
starting
people
a little
weeping
early.
throughout their clans, everyone at the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord blazed hotly, and Moses was displeased. Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give them birth that you should say to me, 'Carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing child, to the land that you swore to give their fathers'? Where am I to get meat to give to all this people? For they weep before me and say, 'Give us meat that we may eat.' I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once if I find favor in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness."
All right. And I did not do a very good job.
Just
of teeing
one
this
or
up.
10. The people among Moses said, "The people among whom I am number 600,000 on foot. And you have said, 'I will give them meat, that they may eat a whole month.' Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them and be enough for them? Or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them and be enough for them?" And the Lord said to Moses, "Is the Lord's hand shortened? Now you shall see whether my word will come true for you or not."
Now we pick it up.
So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord. And he gathered 70 men of the elders and of the people and placed them around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, and took some of the Spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. And as soon as the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but they did not continue doing it. Now 2 men remained in the camp, one named Eldad and the other named Medad, and the Spirit rested on them. They were among those registered, but they had not gone out to the tent, and so they prophesied in the camp. And a young man ran and told Moses, "Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp." And Joshua the son of Nun, the assistant of Moses from his youth, said, "My lord Moses, stop them." But Moses said to him, "Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his Spirit on them." And Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp.
All righty. So I added the other verses so that it would put it in context. Essentially, Moses is out there in the wilderness. Supposedly, the number of Israelites who came out of Egypt were 650,000. It is very likely that it was significantly less than that. But in any event, Moses has the responsibility of leading the Israelites through the wilderness to the promised land. And they are continually grumbling. They complain that they are thirsty. That's when Moses strikes the rock at Meribah and the water comes out. They claim that they are starving, and the miracle of the manna occurs. The Israelites, they go out in the morning, and there's this sort of like this dew that they can collect and they can make into cakes. By the way, gold star for anyone who can tell me what the Hebrew word manna means. A double gold star, because this one's kind of tricky.
Is it like bread of life or something?
Good guess, but not bread of life. It's actually the Hebrew word for the, it's actually more than one word, but it basically means, what is it? They go out in the morning and they see this and they've never seen it before, and they say, "Manna, what is this?" And so that's the origin of the word. And then there's the complaining that they're hungry, which is what we just heard, and the miracle of the quails occurs. There's a strong wind and the quails come in off the Mediterranean, and they're able to capture them and eat. But Moses, if you were to choose one word based upon what we're seeing here and how Moses responds to this latest bout of complaining, what word would you choose? Stressed, okay. Any other words? What's that?
I was gonna say
Whiny.
Stop your whining. I even have a sign.
Oh, okay, stop your whining. Okay. Any other words? the word that came to my mind was overwhelmed.
Oh,
Okay.
well, that's generous.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing to keep in mind is that Moses wasn't a young guy at this point in his life. If we are to believe the words of Deuteronomy, when Moses climbs Mount Nebo and looks over in the promised land and he dies there on Mount Nebo, he was 120 years old.
Okay.
So that means, yes, not bad. So it means that he was somewhere between 80 and 120. Let's say that he was not a spring chicken, so to speak. He was getting along in years, and he is overwhelmed. And so what does God tell Moses to do? Verse
Gather the people.
Yep, verse 24, the very first verse. He gathers 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them around the tent. So essentially what God is doing is he's getting some recruits, some reinforcements for Moses. Moses is still going to be the one in charge, but he's going to have all of this help now. And we know that the Spirit, actually, it's interesting. The Spirit doesn't come down from heaven upon these 70 elders. Where does the Spirit come from? From Moses. Yes, look, the very first verse. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him and took some of the Spirit that was on him, meaning Moses, and put it on the 70 elders. And as soon as the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but they did not continue doing it.
They did not continue doing it.
So they did not continue doing it. My guess is that it was at that moment. So because they're prophesying, it's a way of indicating that they have received this Spirit. I suppose you could liken this to the speaking in tongues, which occurred on the day of Pentecost. And this, as I say, is the Old Testament reading for Pentecost this Sunday. So there's a parallel there. And so we know that they prophesied. They didn't continue to do it. It was a moment of, what's the word I'm talking about?
Revelation.
Or ecstasy, religious ecstasy. Okay. And certainly you're not going to continue in a state of ecstasy indefinitely.
But that brings us to the other two who continued.
So, okay, that brings us to Eldad and Medad. Okay, and you said they continued.
Continued to prophesy.
Okay, what verse is that?
26.
26, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it sounded to me like Eldad and Medad didn't go to the tent.
No, they didn't go.
Yes. Yeah, so they were back. It says they were registered, but they didn't go out. Okay. And so Moses is, how does Moses find out that Eldad and Medad are back in the camp prophesying?
Somebody comes and tells him.
Yeah, who is it that tells Moses? Joshua. Yep. And is Joshua pleased? No. How would you describe Joshua's reaction? Jealous? Okay. Yeah.
Maybe he feels that only Moses should be prophesying.
Maybe, but then how do you explain the fact that if he thinks that only Moses should be prophesying, Joshua just did it? Says what, Joshua was out there with the 70 or maybe the 68, and so he's just prophesied. So if he feels that Moses is the only one who should be prophesying, then he should be scolding himself. I think there's something deeper going on here.
Well, he's part of an exclusive group.
Mm-hmm.
And Hale, he's probably part of that. He's earned it by his involvement, and now somebody outside of that is doing it.
Yep.
But they're registered.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like the parable of the brother there, the brother that goes and spends.
The prodigal son?
Prodigal son.
The prodigal son. Oh, okay, how do you see that as like
Well,
that?
because when he comes back,
Mhm.
the brother that stayed and helped on the farm was really
Mm-hmm.
the one that just squandered everything and had been helping at this big party. He was like,
Yeah.
I've been here helping we all along. He never let my friends and I have a party.
That's right.
These guys have nothing,
Mm-hmm.
but bring trouble and shame and
Yeah.
you're giving them a party.
Yep.
A little bit.
So I call him the dutiful brother,
Yeah.
and he's all upset because
He's a dutiful helper.
Yep.
He's like, well, hey, you've got
So
amazing.
he's upset that the prodigal son has come back and there's a big celebration. And he says to your father, you never gave me a fatted calf that I may make merry with my friends. And I've always looked at that, and as you said, Shirley, stop your whining. He could have gone to his father at any time and said, hey, Dad, can I have a few of my friends over for a little party this weekend? And the implication is the father would have said yes after the father goes out into the field. And he says, my son, everything that I have is yours. So yes, I do see a similarity between the dutiful son in the parable and Joshua here. And Moses' response is wonderful. Verse 29, are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his spirit on them. And Moses is basically saying, why don't you fess up, Joshua? What's really going on here? You're not upset because I'm being dissed here, so to speak. You're upset because you want this to be an exclusive club.
Can I relate? So years ago, before we were even married,
Yeah.
we would sometimes go to this church in Dover, New Hampshire.
Okay.
And we still remember this story that the pastor talked about during one of his sermons because it's so true if you have a sibling, right?
Okay.
He was talking about jealousy.
Yeah.
And saying how, when your mother's cutting up a cake.
Yep.
And, gives you pieces.
Mhm.
And your brother gets a bigger piece of cake. You
Yes.
never once say, oh, I rejoice with you, brother. Look at your bigger piece of cake.
Mhm.
You're just super mad, why did Shirley get a bigger piece of cake?
That's right.
And
Yeah.
you never, but God would want you to rejoice and up
Yep.
people down to you or whatever.
Yep.
But it just makes me think of this,
Yep.
God would want Joshua to
Yep.
rejoice that these people
That's right.
have God in the spirit, and he's just what about me?
Yep.
What
Yep.
about mine?
Yep. Yep. Makes me think of the story of the two little boys, and the mother were making pancakes, and so she brought the first pancake over, and they were both fighting on it, and so the mother scolded them and said, what would Jesus do? Jesus would say, you can have the first pancake. And so one of the boys says to the other one, he says, okay, let's do that. Tommy, you be Jesus. It's just, and I remember many, many years ago, I had a conversation with someone, and she was talking about someone she knew, and I knew the person as well. And as she was describing the person, I said, it sounds like he always wants to have the biggest piece of the pie. And she said, oh no, he doesn't want anyone else to have any pie. And I can see that. Moses, though, isn't concerned about that.
Well, it goes beyond what we're doing here almost.
Okay, how does it go beyond?
Why do we seem to have this need in us? No, it's got to be my way, or it's got to be for me. I'm most important, which is what is at the basis of this.
Okay, so
I think we have a big problem with that in society now.
Big problem with it?
People really want to feel like they're important.
They're entitled.
Not to just
It's
their family, but,
Yeah.
the world in general.
So I'm happy to go in this direction, and especially since in the email I set this up. Since then, I've decided to go in an entirely different direction with the sermon, which is fine because we can talk about this and I don't have to worry about you messing up my sermon for Sunday morning. But so, I've said this many times. You can look at any human emotion and I can find a redeeming value in it, and I can find a less than redeeming value. In other words, I can take any human emotion and see in a situation where it would be good and a situation where it would not be good, okay? Even with love, okay? You have a child who is sick, so you stay up all night watching over the child, with a cool cloth on the head and all of that. That is a good example of love, okay? But a not so good example of love is when your child does something wrong at school and you take the child's side instead of the parents, instead of the teacher's side. I can remember many years ago, we had a teacher in the congregation. She told me about a situation that a friend of hers who taught in another school district experienced. The teacher told the student to do something. He refused. And I always probably say he's like 6th, 7th grade maybe. And so the teacher put her foot down and told him to do what she told him to do. And he got angry and he called her a name that rhymes with witch. So the teacher sent the student to the principal. The principal gave the student a 3-day or something of that nature in school detention. Later that day, the student's father calls the principal up, very angry, demanding to know why his son had been suspended. And the principal said, well, your son is being punished because he called his teacher a name that rhymes with witch. The father's response was, well, did she deserve it? Okay, that's an example of love that is not good. And I can do that with any emotion, except I cannot think of a single redeeming value for jealousy. I cannot think of a situation where jealousy is a good thing. I would be very open to being proven otherwise.
I can see like selfishness back in, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, when you had to be so, you're just trying to like survive with your little tribe of people or whatever, that you had to like get all you can for you, but that's different really.
So you're thinking about ancient times where it was survival of the fittest. So, you had to be a little jealous for yourself, except I'm reminded of a story of some natives in a South Pacific island of some sort. And there were some missionaries, and it actually may have been somewhere in, Australia or New Zealand or like that. And so the missionaries one day were out playing croquet, and the natives were curious. And so they asked, what the game was all about. So the missionaries taught the natives how to play croquet. And at one point, when one of the croquet balls hit another one, the missionary said, you get to send that ball. And he showed them, you put your foot on your ball and you hit the ball with a mallet and send the other one. And he said, the native said, why would I want to do that? And the missionary said, so you can win the game. And it just didn't register. So eventually what happened is all the natives started playing croquet and making up their own rules, and they went through all the wickets. And when the last one got through the last wicket and hit the post, they all started cheering and saying, we won. Okay, so I understand what you're saying, but there's also that alternative where, because of your circumstances, you come together and cooperate. And jealousy, I think you're right. I think there's a big problem with jealousy. And what is behind jealousy? Insecurity. Okay, so in what way does jealousy show an insecurity?
Jealousy shows, well, they succeeded in getting it, but I didn't, so you know, I might not be as good as, or I might not be equal to something else. So why didn't I get my share so that I'm ensured I'm okay, you know?
Okay.
Guaranteeing me being good, or guaranteeing me getting the better part to say, building myself up for my insecurity.
Okay, so if somebody else is getting the attention, if somebody else is getting the award, it means that I'm less than?
That's the insecurity.
Okay, is that the case though?
No,
No,
no, definitely not.
no.
And
And
it's funny because you can see stuff, like there is a lot of talk about, you know, the kind of like social media, so people see like somebody on Instagram
mhm,
or Facebook, like doing something and get jealous and feel like, oh, I want to do that.
why can't I do that?
The flip side is, it's just, I guess, your beliefs and who you are. Like I see, like you can also look at those pictures and feel motivated.
Mm-hmm,
Like, oh, look at so and so and so and so. They're doing stuff. Like there's a woman I know, and she and her husband are just like a couple years like farther along. And, you know, like their kids graduated a little earlier and stuff from high school and college. So like they were empty nesters, and all of a sudden I just saw them like doing all this stuff.
mm-hmm.
And instead of being jealous, I was like, oh,
This is
like,
wonderful.
we can do stuff too.
Mhm.
And it like motivated me to like, okay, now we don't have to let the kids around anymore. Let's go do stuff.
Yep,
you know?
yep.
But
yep.
I don't, it's like with some, I don't know if it's insecurity or what, but some people see it and react jealously.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people see other people's success and
So-
look at it as a motivator.
Yep,
Like,
yep.
go and, like, oh, I could do that,
But-
you know?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think, and if I'm not, let me know. But what I hear you saying is that in certain situations where someone does something and you can't do that, okay, you can say, "I want to be like that person, and I want to be able to do that," and so you push yourself, and it motivates
Right.
you.
And then other people just do and are jealous.
Yeah, yeah. So when you see someone who can do something and you want to do that, is the motivation jealousy?
I don't think so.
Okay, I don't think so either. Yeah, and I think we also have
How, like, you react.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
And
and-
you can control that, I think, you know, it's on you.
right. And I think there's also the question we have to ask ourselves is what is motivating us and why? Okay. And as you were talking to Leslie, I thought of the movie Fear Strikes Out. Anybody remember that movie? It was actually a movie about Jimmy Pearsall, who used to play for the Boston Red Sox. And he had a father who wanted to be a major league baseball player and just never was good enough. And so he wanted to vicariously live through his son, and he kept pushing him and pushing him. And eventually, the Jimmy Pearsall has a nervous breakdown.
My father had an hallucination.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, he told my father that he could never have supper until his hands were bleeding. You know, the old gloves, they
Yeah, yeah.
weren't like the new ones.
Yep.
But he would throw them so many times, when
Oh.
his hand started bleeding,
yeah.
then he could.
And this was your father?
No, my father was talking about Jimmy Pearsall.
Oh, about Jimmy Pearsall.
My father was at the hospital, yeah.
Oh, your father was at the hospital that Jimmy Pearsall ended up at?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and there's a famous scene that I always remember in the movie Fear Strikes Out. And the father, Jimmy Pearsall's father, wants to go to the hospital to see his son, and he's told he can't.
That's right.
And so the father sneaks in. He ends up in Jimmy Pearsall's room, and he's giving him a pep talk and says, you know, you can't be weak. You got to overcome this, and you can't let people see this in you. And you know, you're never going to be a success. And finally, Jimmy Pearsall just pushes him away and says, get away from me. He says, I've given you everything I have. I've got nothing left inside to give you. And that was the moment at which the father is just, you know, devastated. So yeah, we can see someone doing something and we want to do that. But I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, why do we want to do that? Is it to please someone else? Is it to please us? And if it's to please us, is it because we feel that if we can't do that, we will not be good enough. I'll tell you a quick story. So when I made the decision to go to seminary and told each member of my family, they were all thrilled,
Oh, that's good.
except my brother.
Oh,
My brother actually got angry at me. And the reason why he got angry at me was because he felt that I was doing it to please our Father.
yeah.
And eventually I realized that there was some truth in what he said.
Yeah.
And in fact, I had I talk about grace-filled moments. This was the anti-grace-filled moment. I was a student minister at a little church, little Methodist church. And in retrospect, I realize now in Methodist churches, you have lay leaders. And in small little Methodist churches, they can be the what do you call it? The chief.
The dominant person.
Yep. And there were two lay people in this church. One, I now realize in retrospect, had paranoia, was a paranoid schizophrenic. The other one she was just a bully. And we had this meeting at the end of the first year I was there, and the lay leader wouldn't come to the meeting because he was upset with me for some reason. And then he came in and he just flew into a rage. I can still, to this day, I was sitting on the other side of the table and he was jabbing his finger and he said, you, everything was fine until you showed up. And the supervising pastor, after he stormed out, immediately said, I'm sorry, but this church is not healthy enough to continue as a teaching parish. And as I was processing all of this, I was thinking, why did this upset me? And I remember saying to myself, I didn't go to seminary for this. I'm not going to seminary for this. And and so as soon as I said that, I thought to myself, okay, why did you go to seminary? And then I realized that, I had gone in part to please my father, for affirmation, X, Y, and Z. And all of a sudden I thought, you know what? That's not a reason to be in seminary. And I thought, your call isn't legitimate. And so I was seriously thinking about dropping out of seminary. I finally decided not to after I talked to the supervisor, and basically what I learned is that God can use our brokenness. But what I had to do is I had to take steps so that brokenness in me could be healed, so that it wouldn't be the driving force. So in other words, if you're doing ministry because you want to be liked and affirmed, you're going to burn out. So I agree, you can use somebody being able to do something to motivate you, but the question is, why do you want to be like that person? And another way of looking at it, if you're not like that person, is it okay? I think that's the key, to jealousy. You've got to be able to say, okay, maybe I'd like to be able to do this. Maybe I'd like to learn how to do that, but am I okay right now? And if I don't get to the point where I can do this or be like that person, is that going to be okay? Yes, Don.
I'd like to go back to the cake.
The cake, okay.
And
Always good to go back to cake.
That's right.
If you take that cake and the mother's not serving it, you give it to the children to
Mhm.
serve. The child who would take it, the mother, I suppose, in this case, and would divide it up and give it to however other many people are there, and make sure they're served first.
Mhm.
They may or may not get a piece, but their satisfaction is in serving. It's the same thing for a minister in serving communion.
Mhm.
Ministering in God's name,
Yeah.
and therefore saying, I represent that love, that agape that God presents to all people, is what you're doing in each of those cases.
Mhm.
And that is where the antithesis of jealousy is, giving oneself totally to others. You have
Mhm.
prevented, literally, by doing that, the
Mhm.
option of jealousy.
Okay, so in a way, you model the antithesis of jealousy.
Mhm.
Yeah, and as you were talking, so two possibilities of ways of showing this. We're back to celebrating communion the way we did pre-pandemic. Okay, so after we give the elements to the deacons, what do? They serve us. Okay, now interestingly, that's not to say that we are first and foremost. Okay, it's just the opposite, because it is a statement that no one is worthy enough to serve themselves from the table. So in other words, I don't take the element from the table directly and eat it or drink it. And when we were doing communion during the pandemic, after everybody had been served, I would then serve Gail, a minister of discipleship, and she would serve me again, because no one can presume to be worthy enough to serve themselves from the table. And so, yes, I agree that it's sort of the antithesis of jealousy. And I think jealousy is an insecurity. I think it's also a selfishness, you know? Yeah, it's all about me. I deserve the biggest piece of cake.
It is funny that Joshua was sort of, jealous for Moses' sake. I think he liked being like the one specialist,
Moses.
even if Joshua wasn't the guy,
Yeah.
Moses was the guy.
Yep.
Joshua got a lot of pride, probably being like the right-hand man to the guy.
Oh, interesting.
And there's other people prophesying that
Mhm.
he was special. So
Yeah.
there's other people.
Yeah, isn't he?
helping him,
In fact, isn't he called the assistant of Moses?
Yes.
Yeah. And what just popped in my head as you were talking, Leslie, is, what we see in Moses is like the kid who is in the classroom at school. The teacher goes out, and the teacher comes back, and the student says, "Teacher, I wrote down the names of all the kids who talked while you were out of the room." Okay?
You know, for some reason, maybe saying just how to use the assistant and Moses saying or Jill Isaac, I was thinking that it's like the same as there's people that work in like a fancy shop,
Mhm.
fancy clothes, that are really like snooty.
Snooty, yeah,
It's
and
like, you work in a shop, like, why are you being so snooty?
Yep.
It's like.
The Pharisees.
yeah, there's a little bit of Pharisee, yeah. Yeah. So in this story, is there something that we can see that can serve as sort of an antidote to this jealousy?
Well, I don't know what was on that.
Spirit, okay, yeah.
I don't know, let everybody have spirit.
Yeah, so when Moses says, would that all of God's people be prophets, what is that saying?
Serve everybody else, which is in the example used.
Yeah, I see it as,
Wouldn't it be great if everybody had, like, instead of saying like, ooh, I want more money and stuff, like, wouldn't it be great if everybody had enough?
mhm,
Everybody on the planet had enough to eat.
Yeah.
How great would that be?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Instead of saying, oh, I want
And the Lord would put his spirit on you.
yeah, the Lord would put a spirit on them. That's right. So I think what that says to me is Moses is saying, this is an either or. God wants everyone to be someone. God sees everyone as someone. Everyone is capable. And nothing would thrill the Lord more than to have people use their gifts in a way that makes the light of God's love brighter. And that's the problem with jealousy is it's inward instead of outward focusing. And I see what God is saying, or Moses is saying here is, you know what? I don't have a problem with Eldad and Medad prophesying. I think it's a great thing. I think it's a wonderful thing. Only good can happen of people using the gifts that God gives them. And when you use those gifts, okay, it affirms you in a healthy way. Okay, so rather than having to be affirmed by getting ahead of this person or that person, you were affirmed for who you are, and created in the image of God.
Isn't there something in the New Testament about somebody coming to, maybe not even Jesus, maybe Paul or something, saying somebody or other is like a
Oh, yep. So that's-
stuff, and he's like, well, hey, if
Yeah.
you're not.
This is actually from a gospel story.
Oh,
And so one of the disciples comes to Jesus and says, Lord, we saw someone who is not with us casting demons out in your name, and we forbid him. Very similar. Okay. In other words, we're the ones that want to do this. We don't want to dilute our importance. Okay. And Jesus responds by rebuking the disciples, and he says, do not hinder him, for whoever is not against us is with us. Okay. So yeah, very similar to what we have here. Jane, you were going to say that?
Some people who cannot affirm themselves
Yes.
have to be more jealous.
I agree. If you cannot affirm yourself for who you are right now, okay, it's going to open the doors to jealousy. And yes, the jealousy may push you to improve yourself, to develop an ability or talent or something, but it's going to be at a cost. It's going to be at a cost. You're not doing it just to develop your gifts. You're doing it so that you can be somebody, and so that people will respect you.
I think that, again, at the basis of it is for someone like that is they lack the realization that you already are somebody.
That's right.
You're a child of God.
That's right. Yep. And
Two boys, I used to say, you're not equal, but you're both special.
oh, there you
You
go.
know, and boy, to the point where, going back to the cake, one would cut it, and the other one could choose the first piece.
And that's
Sometimes it took-
yep. That's my mother did the same thing. Yep. My brother and I, one would cut the cake and the other one would get to choose. But you know what the problem there is? We always wanted the other one to be the one to cut the cake.
I thought verse 25 was interesting.
Oh, let's look at verse 25, Jane. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, meaning Moses, and took some of the spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. Say again, please. Yeah.
This is kind of weird. It kind of reminds me like we took part of a cobbler and put it on the.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But the spirit with the.
Jane,
It seems as if the spirit was a fin, and then you took the fin and put it on the
Yep.
gun.
Yes, he divided up, and I hope we got the proportions right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and years ago I gave a sermon on this passage, and the title of the sermon was "Don't Cry Over Spilt Spirit." And something that just occurred to me. Now we began by saying, that God takes some of the spirit on Moses and then puts it on the 70.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so all of a sudden it just occurred to me, because when we started out, we said, why didn't God just take the spirit and put it on the 70?
Yeah.
Because obviously that's how Moses got the spirit. God put the spirit upon him. And what I realized is maybe what this is saying is to people like Joshua and the 70, you're getting the spirit to help Moses. Okay. So remember your place. Okay. Because you're not getting it from me directly, you're getting it from Moses. And so that suggests to me that there's a message there that says, yes, you're going to have this special ability, but don't let it go to your head, because Moses is still my main man.
Do always did that also.
Oh, go ahead, Don, and then Leslie.
I see the other side of that. I see Moses pleads to God, this is more than I can handle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm overwhelmed. So rather than God saying, well, I'll bring some other people in, he is allowing Moses' spirit to be shared with the others versus bringing in other spirits, so that Moses is really expanded, if you will, in his spirit into the whole group.
Correct.
And it's not a matter of the spirit being different parts and divisions. The spirit comes from God through whatever means God uses, which in this case was Moses.
Yep.
And shared because Moses had a need.
That's right.
That would be my interpretation.
I think we're saying pretty much the same thing. It comes through Moses and then goes out to the others. And it's a symbolic way of saying that, remember now, you get the Spirit not because you're somebody special. You got the gift of the Spirit to help Moses, to get.
They are blessed with the opportunity to help
Moses and help Moses get the chosen people to the chosen land. So it isn't self-serving, it's for a purpose. Yep. Yes, Leslie.
Well, I always thought, like you had here, you did, but I was just wondering if, does there seem to be any change in Moses after this? Like, is he?
Did Moses change?
Anyway, because he had to put some of the spirit on his, he was.
Oh, was he diminished?
Yeah.
Oh, was Moses diminished because God did? And yeah, I think this, so. The way I would answer that question: was he diminished because some of the Spirit was put on others? I'll ask this question: does the mother who has 2 children love them more than the mother who has 4 children? No. It's the same thing. Yeah, I think it's the more you use what you have, the more you discover what you have, to use. And clearly, Moses is not diminished. There's nothing that I can think of throughout the rest of the Exodus story where they say, oh, Moses has lost a little bit off his fastball, so to speak.
He's actually gained.
Yes.
That, go with reference to that book, the next position again, quite frankly, you gain, the more you share your spirit, the greater is your spirit.
The more you share, the greater is your spirit. Yep. I think that's the way it works. And again, that's the difference, the complete opposite of jealousy. Okay. Jealousy is a turning inward. Okay. Love and faith is a turning outward. And the other thing to keep in mind is when it comes to the spirit that those 70 elders received, where did that spirit come from?
From God, actually.
Exactly.
Moses was like a conduit.
Moses was the conduit. And, in a sense, isn't that a good metaphor for our journey of faith, that we are a conduit for God's grace and God's truth and God's love? And I will tell you that when we had student ministers, I would always have a conversation with them about the priestly role of ministry. And in the Protestant Reformation, they did away with the priestly role of ministry. And priestly meaning being a conduit for God's grace and healing. And it ties in with the Great Confession when Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And truly I tell you, you are a rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the powers of hell shall not prevail against it. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." And that verse there specifically relates to the priest's authority in the Catholic Church to forgive sins. Okay. And this is behind the whole sacrament in the Catholic Church of confession and absolution. The priest has the ability to pronounce absolution because God gave, or Jesus gave Jesus gave Peter the keys to the kingdom, and the keys to the kingdom are transferred to priests, bishops, and cardinals through what is known as apostolic succession. So in the Catholic Church, when you're ordained, the cardinal will put his hand on your head, and the Spirit goes upon you. It's very similar to what we're talking about here. And so that's why the Catholic Church believes that priests have the authority to pronounce forgiveness. The Protestant Reformation did away with that because of abuses in it, indulgence. That's right, indulgence. So the Protestant Reformation did. I've made the argument that that was a mistake in the Protestant Church. And is there a role for the priestly ministry? And my answer is yes. And I've told the story about when I was in my last year. No, this is when I was at the church that was very dysfunctional. And there was a gentleman who was dying of cancer. And I would go to see him and he would say, oh, when I get better, I'll be back in church in the spring. And I knew it was terminal, but I knew that I couldn't say, hey, let's face reality here. But as he continued to get worse and worse, he became more and more terrified because he was in denial, but at some level he knew what was coming. And so I went to see him one day and he asked for a piece of paper, a pad of paper and a pen. And he sat there in a chair and he put the pen to the paper and he would try to write something. He'd look out the window and then this was in a hospital. And I asked him, I said, do you want me to write something for you? And he'd say, no. And so finally, I said, I needed to go, but I would be back in a couple of days. I commuted to seminary and the hospital was on the way home. So I went in a couple of days later. He was so weak, he was in bed. And so he motioned me to come sit on the side of the bed. And he shocked me when he said, I'm frightened. And in retrospect, I realize now that what he was trying to do with the pad of paper and the pen, he was trying to write something that he couldn't just come out and say verbally. And so when he said, I'm frightened, talking about the Spirit literally came over me because what came out of my mouth didn't come from me. Because, when you're in seminary, you're supposed to be able to walk on water and have all the answers and everything. And what came out of my mouth wasn't a great answer, but a vulnerability. And when he said, I'm frightened, I said to him, I know you're frightened, and I'm frightened too because I want to help you and I don't know how. And in that moment, it was like, I could feel the Spirit in the room that day. It was just beyond words. So I said, as soon as I said that, he opened up. And for lack of a better word, he proceeded to share with me a deathbed confession. Now, if I had been a good Protestant at that moment, I would have said, let us pray that the Lord will forgive you. Is that what he needed? No. I basically pronounced forgiveness to him. The next day I went in to see him and I said, yesterday you were frightened. I'm wondering how you're feeling today. And he said, I'm okay today. I'm at peace now. I realized also in retrospect, he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of what was waiting for him after death. He was afraid that he was going to hell. And so if I had been the good Protestant minister to be and handled it the way a good Protestant minister to be should handle it, he would have been right where he was. So, in that moment, the Spirit literally came upon me. And the other thing that I will say is I do believe that there's a role for the priestly aspect of ministry in the Protestant church, but there's a difference. Okay. In the Catholic Church, and this leads to, Shirley, what you said about indulgences and the abuses of it. There's the danger of, I have the keys, I'm going to jingle them, and you jump. And when you've jumped, I'll give you forgiveness. At its worst, that's not the way it's supposed to work.
It's also sort of an accounting, also.
A little bit what?
Sort of accounting.
Accounting?
Like, oh, you say, well, I took the north thing, well, then say this, and it'll, like,
Yeah.
if you're not sorry.
Right.
It doesn't really mean,
That's right.
you know, there's
That's right.
plenty of kids
Right.
that
There has to be a sincerity to it.
say, you know, people just say that.
So when I say that there's a room for the priestly ministry in Protestant ministry, it's different. I say it's basically emptying yourself, getting all of your hangups and your issues and your pride and all of the things that can stand between you and God's grace flowing through you. That's what the priestly ministry for me is all about. And that day in that hospital room, what had to happen is I had to get over my Joshua moment.
Yeah.
It's all about me. I need to have the right answer and, help me say the perfect thing, Lord.
Yeah.
I had to, the only way God's grace flowed through me that day, I believe, is because I let go of that need and I was vulnerable. Okay. Yes, Don.
The phrase and the reason why, what I understood on the Protestant change is that there's one phrase that needs to go through. I don't care whether it's a minister, whether you, me, or someone else.
Mhm.
When we approach a job, a task, an interaction with other people, is one phrase: "Not my will, but thy will."
Yep. Not my will, but thy will be done. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
That's really our relationship
Yep.
with God, because we're a tool or an instrument
Right.
of God.
And one last thing I'll add to all of this is that if you step into those priestly shoes, you have to have the same attitude that Jesus had when he healed people. And very often when he healed people, he didn't say, now you go and tell everyone what I did for you. He would say, go, your faith has made you well.
Right.
And so I think that's an important part of it.
So liturgically speaking, there are remnants in parts of our service of this aspect. I was thinking of in communion, on communion Sundays, we do two things. One is we pass the peace, which is really saying that we are putting ourselves right with our brothers and sisters.
Okay.
In other words, we are, and because there was the ancient tradition of when you come before the Lord's table, way back in the earliest church, of making sure that you were at peace and at right with one another. And then we have the general confession. And the granting of granting of absolution.
And then that is important. Confession, prayer of confession, being in right relationship with God, passing the peace, symbolizing our desire to be in right relationship with each other. But sometimes there's a need for individual as opposed to corporate confession. So I thank you all, and I will see you all next week.